I'm Sergeant Moss, and today I want to talk about a topic that is often misunderstood by some. I want to talk about police use of force. Now, I am a sergeant on our department, but I am not an expert in this field. So joining me today will be Sergeant Jason Youngman, our defensive tactics instructor for our department. Sergeant Youngman, I want to go over some of the principles that we teach in our defensive tactics program, and so people know what we do and why we do it. Jason, tell us what your experience is that got you to be our lead DT instructor.
Well, prior to my career in law enforcement, I had quite an extensive background in martial arts and defensive tactics and combatives. I had some training in some traditional Okinawan martial arts styles, moved in to do some amateur boxing for a while. Once I got on with the department, I knew right away I wanted to help with this program. I was sent up to the state to take on some of the instructor courses there. And after a couple years of doing that, I received my master instructor certification from the state academy, and about 4 years ago took over the program for the department.
You have a new hire group that you're training this week. What are some of the important principles or things that you're going to teach them when they have to go use force as a deputy for the first time?
The new hire group here, it's very interesting. We do something that most agencies don't, and that is to provide quite a bit of training before they go up to the state academy for their full training there. And there's some time where they're going to be in the field working with a field training officer, and they could potentially get into a use of force situation during that time. So we need them to have a basic understanding of our use of force laws and principles, and then some basic ways to protect themselves if they get into a bad spot, whether it's standing up, on the ground, facing any kind of potential weapons, just ways that they can protect themselves for the next couple of months before they go off to the state academy to get their full training there.
How do use of force with deputies differ than two people just fighting in the street?
Well, when we have deputies involved, we are always working in response to some kind of threat or some kind of resistance, whereas two people in the fighting in the streets, it's either way very unpredictable. Deputies, once we have gained an advantage and we start to gain some control, there's an expectation that we will then begin to de-escalate back down to just restraints and eventually no force being used once we have that person into custody.
What is the goal in training our deputies in defensive tactics?
Number one, we want them to be able to protect themselves. We want them to make sure that they go home safe to their families. They're not going home with any kind of serious injuries and things like that. We also want them to be able to protect citizens from harm. So if someone is threatening to do harm or trying to do harm to a citizen, we want them to be able to have the tools to step in there and stop that. And then we also want them to do right by their community in using a reasonable amount of force and following laws and policies that surround use of force.
Why is it that we have to train in defensive tactics where the public honestly just wants us to use de-escalation and not ever have to use physical force?
In our defensive tactics program, we take kind of a holistic approach. We don't teach just the physical skills. We also teach the tactic and strategies of how we approach someone, how we talk to someone, how we position ourselves in our environment so that we set ourselves up for success. The ultimate success would be I'm able to mitigate all the threats and get someone into custody without ever having to use any kind of force at all. Unfortunately, de-escalation is a little bit trickier than that, and it's a two-way street. I can't de-escalate someone that isn't willing to be de-escalated. Okay? It's not some magic thing I can throw on them and say, hey, you're de-escalated. They have to follow my verbal prompts and my strategies and then come down and de-escalate. And hopefully I'm able to do that. The reality is that it doesn't work every time. And there are times when we will have to use force. There are also times when our officers are just flat out attacked or assaulted and have to defend themselves. We want them to be able to secure someone, control someone very quickly so that it doesn't further escalate into something worse like a shooting or something like that.
What type of tactics do we cover in our training?
Things we cover are how to use some of the tools on their belt, like their tasers, their batons, their OC spray, which is pepper spray, and then also a lot of just their hands-on tools, how to grab somebody, how to take someone down, how to control someone once you're on the ground. And then if we flip that, maybe we're not in control on the ground, how to get up out of a bad spot from on the ground, how to get away and break away from someone if they're assaulting you. We also cover things like strikes and things like that we can use as an impedance or a way to stop an attacker so that we can now de-escalate it back down to a lower level of force and get control of somebody.
That was the first part of my interview with Sergeant Youngman. We went over some of the tactics that are used and how deputies are trained in use of force. In part 2, we'll be going over some of the expectations that the public might have, how the laws have changed in the past year, and then also how we've changed our tactics in the past year.